Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited that so many of you could join us this evening for What's Happening in the Stars Right Now. I'm Alex Elliott. I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us online this evening. Before we start, I wanted to go over just a few things so that we can troubleshoot everything in advance. We are going to be having a Q&A after this conversation, or after this talk, so please submit your questions at any time. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can use that Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll only be able to see your own questions in this tab until the Q&A session begins at the end of the talk. If you're joining us via YouTube or Facebook, you can post your questions right in the chat. We're going to try to get through as many questions as we can at the end. If you have technical issues at any time, you can contact us using that Q&A tab on Zoom or chat on the other streams. And you can email us at publicprograms@ciis.edu and we can answer your questions right away. Now, I'm very excited tonight to introduce our presenter, Richard Tarnas, and then we will jump into his talk. Richard Tarnas is the founding director of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at CIIS. He was formerly the director of programs and education at Esalen Institute and is the author of The Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview. He is a past president of the International Transpersonal Association and served for many years on the board of governors for the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring Rick in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Tarnas, as you now know, and I want to thank Alex for the introduction and CIIS for hosting this event, hosting the event both for our community and also for the larger number of people around the world who have tuned in tonight. I've taught at CIIS for 25 years and been very grateful for the home that it's offered to our philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program, but also for being at that kind of cutting edge that is of the paradigm evolution in our time in so many ways, and the kind of material that we're setting forth tonight is one of those ways. In some ways, something like what we're doing tonight, where we're taking a very serious look at what's happening in the heavens, to help provide us with a larger context for understanding what we're going through now, and this grave and astonishing moment. It calls out to many of us for getting a deeper understanding, a larger context, a frame of reference that can help us navigate our way, and in a way, doing something like this in our time can seem pretty paradigm shifting or cutting edge. But the fact of the matter is, what we're doing tonight has been done countless times over the millennia and the centuries, going back to, it would happen in ancient Babylon, or in Alexandria, or in Rome, or in Benares, or in Renaissance Italy, or medieval Paris, or Shakespearean London. This kind of reflection on and inquiry into basically trying to get a sense for which way the winds are blowing. What's the stance of the astral gods right now with respect to us and our planet? What in God's name is going down right now? I mean, so I used to do an annual State of the World report, so to speak, both probably a decade ago each year here at CIIS, and often have done it at other places too, like the Jungian associations around the world and places like that. But and I remember particularly the week of 9/11, that concentrated everyone's minds, and it brought many to look for a larger framework of meaning and understanding the timing of things and what's happening. It was actually after that that the New York publishers got in touch with me about could I please hurry up and finish Cosmos and Psyche. It's often under critical conditions that we open up to we recognize our need for a larger perspective. People are drawn towards they would go and see a therapist. They would come and see. They would consult an astrologer. There has to be, in a way, something happens that breaks down the armoring that allows for this larger one to open up to a larger perspective. So I'm going to do my best tonight to convey what's happening, the major dynamics that are most vividly at work. And astrologers have known for quite a while that this year's lineup of planets was something very significant. They've had deep concerns, of course, but also hopes. And I might add, for good reason in both cases. This is a rare convergence of multiple transits that are very powerful and that could go a number of different ways depending on how we respond to them. We could say that this convergence, we have to keep in mind as we're looking at what's going on right now, and of course, the world is hyper-focused on the coronavirus pandemic and what it's meaning to all of us as individuals, as families, as communities, as societies, as a civilization. That's very clearly uppermost, but it's also what's going on is taking place against the continuing and ever worsening global emergency of the planet, of climate change and the mass extinction of species. So just in general, not knowing necessarily about a pandemic coming, although that has in the past, these transits have converged, coincided with major pandemics, but it can take many other forms. But even without the pandemic at the top of our minds right now, we were aware of the fact that what's happening in the world is an extremely dramatic situation, which in a way all of human history, the entire Earth history is in some ways in the balance. So let's take a look at a chart. I'm going to just show one visual image tonight, just to kind of give you a kind of clear sense of where the planets are, and I will, for those who will be listening to this as a podcast later, I know that they're going to send this image, this chart, out to along with the podcast. But I'm just going to be showing the outer 5 planets. That these are the ones that are really carrying the action right now. So let me just bring that up. This will take 1 second as a little operation. Okay, I need to move this there. Okay, so I believe that you can now see at the top of your chart, at the top of your screen, you'll be able to see a triple conjunction up here. That's Pluto at the very top on the right. Jupiter's right next to it, looks like a stylized 4. And then Saturn, kind of recognizable, the scythe, the cross over the scythe. There, that's Saturn. So that's huge, rare, potent. The Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn triple conjunction, particularly this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's what everybody's talking about. It's got that's where the absolute gravitas, the kind of encounter with kind of a mortal emergency that completely focuses all activity and has so much shaping our society, social life, and consciousness right now. That's particularly the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. The Jupiter brings in a whole nother element, which I'll unpack. And then all three of these are in a square to Uranus, which is over here on the left. And these 4 planets, these are the ones that are doing they're the heavy hitters right now. And that's where the drama is especially taking place. And I'll be focusing on that. I'll give you also a little sense for the timing of these right now. This, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that I just was talking about, that began in 2018. It got much stronger last year, 2019, and it reached exact alignment this year. And it will continue pretty strongly right through next year. So that's very typical of Saturn-Pluto conjunction, would last that long, and we're at kind of the peak of it right now, as Saturn will go back and forth, getting back closer to Pluto again, and then going forward. The bigger transit that is happening, that has been going on for the last 12, 13, 14 years, is this Uranus square Pluto, which we're moving right to the very end of now. That square of Uranus to Pluto, that's the one where all the kind of revolutionary changes, the emancipatory movements, the drive for radical reform. We'll unpack that very soon, but also many other qualities of the last 10, 15 years, the hyper speed of the technological advance, the widespread movements of social protest and impulses for freedom, and at the same time it can arouse kind of mob energies, a kind of collective id with very problematic elements like the will to power. And then the Jupiter coming into the triple conjunction, that is basically that conjunction to both Pluto and Saturn is basically a transit for this year. It started at the beginning of this year, January, and it will go into the beginning of next year. So that one's a shorter transit. It has, that Jupiter brings in, it tends to kind of expand and give a more global reach, international quality to whatever it's touching. In this case, the enormous contraction of history that the Saturn-Pluto conjunction represents. But it also, it can bring in greater elements of benevolence or generosity or faith in a positive outcome, etc. It can also, it tends to, especially with Pluto, it tends to bring in a quality of high drama and kind of geopolitical high drama is very characteristic of it. And then the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, also very important. This is social justice issues tend to come right to the surface with that, between the Jupiterian impulse for, well, Saturn related to poverty, for example, deficit, lack of resource, and so forth. Jupiter being, it can be wealth, it can be the elevated parts of society, and when it combines with other dimensions of the Saturn Pluto, which have to do with moral principle and jurisprudence and social justice issues, with Pluto driving this to tremendous intensity, all sorts of things that have been going on for a long time, such as the vast social inequality that our society is dominated by, riven by, is just being compelled to the surface with kind of extremely potent force right now with the Plutonic impulse right there. So I'll talk about each of these in more detail and their meanings, but I just wanted to give you a sense for this triple conjunction up here at the top of the chart, and the squares to Uranus. Neptune too is got some interesting action going on, which I'll mention in the course of the next hour. But I want to mainly focus at this point on the action between these four really intensively constellated dynamic energies. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share now and come back. Okay, so one thing I didn't mention is that about 2 months ago, Mars crossed into that triple conjunction there, and that reached a kind of trigger point right as the pandemic was reaching a trigger point. Mars, which often serves as a what we call a trigger transit, because it moves faster, it tends to kind of assertively, energetically push things into action that are already in the wings, so to speak, but it drives forward. Mars came right across that starting a couple months ago, just as the pandemic started really cresting in world significance, and it really has, for up until for most of these last 2 months, it's been right in that triple conjunction, and it's just now been leaving, and it was and squaring Uranus as well during that time, which brings in a whole other thing as well. So now I'd like to unpack a bit each of these for you, and how they're combining, and a little more about their timing. But if I were to try to sum up in a single sentence the current moment, taking in the convergence of these four planets working together, and the archetypal energies that they reflect, I would basically say that this is a time in which there are volcanically intense evolutionary pressures for the radical reconfiguration of all life structures. That's basically it. I mean, that's not it about in terms of all that's happening, but that is a headline that does a fairly good job of summarizing the kind of central through line or a vector of what we have going here right now. So a few background principles to keep in mind. It's just so important to do this in our time when many people are not already initiated into the astrological perspective. I imagine that I know there's about 500 people on this webinar tonight, and even more than that number have signed up to receive it afterwards across the ocean and on the East Coast and so forth, to be able to watch it. And I can't expect that all of you necessarily have already kind of been initiated into the astrological mystery, have a knowledge of all the some of the basic principles with which either astrologers in general work, but particularly the kind of analysis that we in our community, the California Institute of Integral Studies, the Archetypal Research Collective, this work began about 40 years ago with Stan Groff and myself at Esalen Institute, and it's just this kind of growing since then. And what we have found are certain fundamental principles that are important to keep in mind when we do this kind of analysis that came after years of watching it, how it works. The first thing is these planets don't work as if in a kind of through a kind of linear mechanistic causality, as if the planets are making things happen here through electromagnetic radiation or gravity or like billiard balls hitting each other in a kind of Newtonian way. It's not like that. It's rather it seems to reflect something more like a universe that is profoundly integrated, celestial and terrestrial, human and more than human, psyche and cosmos. It's integrated all the way down, and it seems that the movements of the planets have a kind of ongoing orchestrated correlation with the archetypal patterns and movements of human experience. And that relationship seems to be well described in Jung's notion of synchronicity. He himself studied astrology for most of his lifetime. It became quite practiced with it, used it with his patients in his practice right to the end, more and increasingly so. And and this helped influence his notion of synchronicity, where the archetypes could be reflected in external events as well as what's going on in people's interior life. Their dreams, their visions, their emotional states could find reflections in things that could not be readily recognized as having been kind of caused from, there wasn't like a causal relationship between the two that could be recognized. The ancient Greeks would be able to talk about, well, there's a formal causal relationship, that's the archetypal quality, and then there's a final cause relationship, namely that there seems to be purposes that are unfolding through these. They had a broader, Aristotle in particular had a broader comprehension of what causality was. But just, well, we moderns have largely, since the scientific revolution, kind of compressed causality down to mechanistic causality, at least until quantum physics got into the picture. So really one of the finest descriptions of this notion of how the planets are connected is from Plotinus, the great Neoplatonic philosopher from the ancient Roman Hellenistic period. He said, "The stars are like letters which inscribe themselves at every moment in the sky. Everything in the world is full of signs. All events are coordinated. All things depend on each other. As has been said, everything breathes together." That's the key idea. Everything breathes together. And Jung said in his Memories, Dreams, Reflections near the end of his life, he said, "Our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe, and what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche." So that's basically the kind of causal framework that, and one other key principle to keep in mind. This is not a deterministic system. It's not fatalistic. And this has to do with the very nature of archetypes. These energies are very powerful. They're numinous. They shape and inform things, both in the interior psyche and the outer world. And each of these archetypes has a distinctive, if complex, character. But they have a kind of rainbow iridescent variation of possible manifestations. they are multivalent. They can be enacted in multiple ways, and our agency, our capacity to exert our will and bring in our intelligence and our insight and so forth, those our agency plays a role in how these archetypal energies will manifest themselves. It's not like a one-way system. It's a participatory dynamic. And because the archetypes, as you'll see, has this range of potential manifestations from light to shadow, from very life-enhancing to destructive, trivial to profound, because they have all these different ways. That's why astrology, I think properly understood, is not concretely predictive. Rather, it is archetypally predictive. If you can get the difference. It's not concretely predictive, it's archetypally predictive. It doesn't tell us that this particular strain of coronavirus is going to emerge in December in China and then start spreading through the world in 2000 through 2020 through much of the rest of the world. But it does say the Saturn Pluto conjunction, along with the square to Uranus and so forth, does say sudden, very challenging events that can bring an extraordinary confrontation with mortality on a collective scale is quite very much one of the possible manifestations of this particular archetypal complex. But again, the more consciousness we can bring to the table, the more courage, the more self-awareness, the more intelligence and imagination and compassion that we can bring into participating in these very powerful archetypal forces that are working through the world right now, then the more free we are the more skillful we can be as in receiving and participating in these energies that are coming through us and around us. Okay, so what I'd like to now do is to let's first focus on that Saturn Pluto. I'll spend a few minutes on each of the big archetypal combinations. The planets, when they come into hard aspect alignment, hard aspect being like the conjunction, the square, the opposition. These are the dynamic aspects. They're the alignments with respect to the Earth that really tend to make things happen, and they also tend to require more, they put more demands on us. We have to kind of rise to the occasion compared to the softer aspects like the trine, the sextile, 120 degrees, 60 degrees. Those tend to just kind of flow in and you can work with them or not, but they're kind of like opportunities that you can run with. They're gifts. But the hard aspects they demand, and they are also the ones that as a result of what they demand, they make the difference in, they are what shape our character in our personal lives. They are what shape a generation's character. And they are the periods that we look back on in history, which I hope that we all can look back on this period in history as a time when we rose to the occasion, or when we were able to make profound transformational actions and put in new structures for society, for economics, for our ecological relationship to the rest of the Earth community, and our own psychological structures and our ways of structuring our daily lives. In all those ways, if we meet, if we have to work with these. They're going to affect us one way or another, but the more we can be conscious of what's going on, and the more we don't deny or suppress or project onto others, scapegoat, etc., then the more fruitful will be this time in a very, very important way. So let me say some of the things about the current Saturn Pluto conjunction. And again, this is the one that began about 2 years ago, but it got much stronger last year and this year, and we're kind of at a crest, a peak right now. And I'm going to describe, people get these transits as personal transits too, and that lasts, they depending on which transit it is, Saturn to Pluto or Pluto going across one's natal Saturn, you get these as a personal transit when they cross your personal chart, your birth chart. But, and that can happen at any time. Either, let's say, Pluto or Saturn might cross the other planet in your natal chart, and then you'd get this kind of energy for a few months or for even several years. But what is happening now is that the entire collective psyche is being informed by this powerful Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's why we call it a world transit. What I showed you on the screen there is something that Saturn-Pluto is conjoined for everyone in the world. The world keeps spinning, and so that Saturn-Pluto may be overhead or rising or at the base of the, at the midnight position, or might be setting in different parts of the world at any given time. But everybody is within the embrace, so to speak, of that, or the grip would be a better term for the Saturn-Pluto, of that conjunction. And so that's a world transit. Now, the thing about world transits is that they're also going across everybody's individual charts in their own individual way. Each person's getting their own inflection, their own version of these that has a lot, it depends so much on your own life and character and personal birth chart, which kind of is carrying the deeper kind of formational qualities of your being. So we each participate in this whole in different ways, and yet with big world transits like this, we're all immersed in a larger collective gestalt, a zeitgeist that is very much, it's in the air. Everybody knows it, everybody can feel it, and that's what we're focusing on right now. So here are some of the characteristic Saturn-Pluto archetypal qualities. There's often a sense of the environment as dangerous, or the world as a dangerous place. Certainly, there's a sense of confronting dire circumstances, or a sense of life or of the environment being such that one feels the need for erecting protective barriers or boundaries, extreme security precautions, fortifying borders, increased regulations and restrictive laws, even draconian measures. This happens regularly with Saturn-Pluto aspects. For example, under the very last Saturn-Pluto opposition, see, we're in the conjunction now, which is like the new moon position, when the sun and moon come together. See, we're at that's the end of the lunar cycle and the beginning of the next one. Well, we're at the end of this Saturn-Pluto cycle and the beginning of the next one right now. It's both a kind of dying and a birthing, which is extremely relevant to the archetypal nature of these two planets, which I'll get into in a sec. But in terms of that impulse for feeling that there's something in the environment that is dangerous, predatory, invasive, and the need to put up boundaries, structures, regulations, security measures. That's what is under the opposition of Saturn and Pluto. The last one was from 2001 to 2004. And 9/11 happened right at that, just as it was really coming into tight alignment. And with the all the anti-terrorist measures that got put into place then, and also the whole political reality of the Bush-Cheney administration, that kind of radical conservative empowerment or reactionary empowerment that combined to set in motion all sorts of, let's say, security measures by which we are still living every time we go to the airport, for example. There also can be, I'm focusing right now on some of the more challenging elements of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I'm going to unpack, there's a lot of very good things that come with this as well, but I don't want to just jump to that without admitting addressing directly the elephant in the room, well, the dragon in the room, which is the conditions that we are facing today, and this is that feeling of we're in a very dire situation. There can also be a feeling of being trapped or imprisoned, being forced underground, for example, and of course, millions of people are feeling claustrophobically enclosed right now. Because Saturn has to do Saturn is the principle of limit, of constriction, of reacting and setting up boundaries. It has to do with illness, aging, mortality, anxiety. It has to do, it's in a sense like all the things that are, Saturn is the archetype of the problematic aspect of life, okay? I mean, it's much more than that too. I mean, Saturn is not only the skeleton and the skull that are the symbol of death, it is the skeleton that allows us to stand up straight, that gives us a backbone, that gives us a capacity to stand for what we believe in. Okay, it's both heavy like lead, but it's also and grave, but it's also the gravitas of moral gravitas, the gravitas and wisdom that comes from experience, that comes from the capacity to be able to speak with authority has to come from experience and from suffering and from time, chronos, time, aging. All those are part of the Saturn complex. Pluto's nature, which is this kind of volcanic energy that is like the overwhelming intensity of the volcano, of the hurricane, of the from the depths. It's Pluto, Hades, Dionysus are these great Greek gods that combined carry a lot of the powerful meaning of what we astrologically call Pluto, the elemental energies of life that are both destructive and creative, regenerative. It is very connected to Freud's id, to Nietzsche's will to power and Schopenhauer's will. It's in the mythic terms, it's like the Hawaiian goddess Pele, or the certain qualities of the Indian goddess Kali, and also the god Shiva. These gods of basically death and rebirth, destruction and regeneration. All that's Pluto, and Pluto, whatever it touches, tends to drive with tremendous intensity whatever other archetype it's in interaction with. It tends to tremendously empower and impel to overwhelming proportions that can also become destructive as well as deeply empowering. So when you put these together, we see these are periods of like confronting mortality on a large scale, which, for example, everybody did with 9/11, and in the period after that, in the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, that's still been going on all this time. Both world wars, World War I, 1914, World War II, 1939, began under Saturn Pluto in hard aspect. Those were especially intense and heavy versions of them, of the Saturn Pluto cycle, because they happened on each side of the, at least this is our best sense of it, is that they happened on each side of the discovery of Pluto, which in 1930, and that whole period had this kind of plutonic kind of eruption from the underworld. And the great powerful evolutionary forces and the violence that and the nuclear energies that got released and so forth. But we've got a lot of that now. And I might just mention on the side, the United States in particular has been getting an especially heavy duty version of the plutonic over the last few years, because the United States is going through its Pluto return. That is, Pluto's whole cycle takes almost 250 years to go around once. And you know how people go through their Saturn return between age 28 and 30, and all sorts of classic Saturn things happen. It's a period of real maturation. It's a maturational threshold, the ending of youth and the beginning of one's adult responsibilities, or I mean, all sorts of ways it can come through. But we're going through, the country, the United States, it's going through its Pluto return, which no individual would ever go through, at least at this point, living that long a period. And it's quite remarkable. I mean, with this, how plutonic, I mean, in 2016, when the Trump election happened, Pluto also happened to be opposing the US sun at that point. This is the July 4th, 1776 birth chart of the US that's widely used. And I mean, it's just like the jaws of Hades, in some sense, opened up and pulled the soul of America, Persephone, into the depths of the underworld. It abducted Persephone, and in a sense, the country has been reeling from that event and recognizing the kind of plutonic shadow that exists in our country, and having to confront it as in a way that one doesn't have to confront if one doesn't have that kind of person in the leadership. So that was also taking place against the backdrop of the big Uranus square Pluto period, that we were getting so many more kind of hopeful signs, like having the first African-American president and family in the White House in the beginning part of this Uranus square Pluto, the Occupy movements, the Bernie and Elizabeth Warren's candidacies, and having women presidential candidates like Hillary Clinton. All these were classic expressions of the Uranus Pluto energy, which is, in a positive way, is what I mentioned. Pluto impels and drives whatever it touches, but in this case, it's Uranus, that Uranian Promethean energy, which tends to bring sudden, unexpected changes that can be very liberating, reformist, and opening up to new horizons. And let me say a little bit more about the Saturn Pluto, and then get back to this bigger Uranus Pluto transit that we've also been, that is in the kind of deep background of what we're going through. So confronting mortality, Saturn Pluto, confronting mortality on a large scale, the atmosphere of doom, apocalyptic anxieties, which relative to these are often, like now, relative to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it speaks ultimately and more deeply to the global climate change crisis and the vast destruction and kind of apocalyptic atmosphere that has been emerging decade after decade. But really, under these periods, Saturn, Pluto, they tend to come to the fore with great force, and it comes to, and people become much more conscious of it. And people who are born under Saturn, Pluto periods, like Greta Thunberg or Thomas Berry or Rachel Carson, they carry this awareness of the need to protect nature and against depredation. See that Saturn Pluto goes both ways. Protect against nature, which is in some sense what the lockdown is doing. Very Saturn Pluto word, lockdown. So is the whole area of incarceration, imprisonment. Why the focus on prisons, incarceration, prison reform is so uppermost right now over these last recent years with that's very typical under Saturn Pluto. And then there's the armored personality, there's the buffered self that goes with Saturn Pluto, the attempt to control nature within and without. Also efforts to kind of resist human exploitation of the environment. These are all because Saturn has to do with loss or deficits, lack, going down, the depression. And when it comes in, and Pluto-Saturn periods often bring major recessions or depressions, sometimes psychological, but also economic losses, and also the need to erect structural reforms to control kind of wildly irresponsible financial actors. That's a positive side of the Saturn Pluto, to regulate the free market. See, freedom isn't always just life enhancing. Freedom can also be irresponsible and havoc producing and very narcissistic. And Saturn Pluto at its best puts in like wise regulation, for example, to ameliorate injustice or severe economic hardship. Now, this theme of financial depressions or recessions, we've seen more than the usual amount of this in the last 12 years because Saturn, this is one of the rare times that this Saturn-Pluto hard aspect is also in there with Uranus, which tends to catalyze suddenly and drop, in this case, drop the bottom out of like the market. And so we had the Saturn-Uranus-Pluto T-square, that is those three planets, Saturn opposite Uranus, Pluto halfway between 2008 and 2011. And that was that coincided with the great economic collapse, financial banks, unemployment around the world, et cetera, that really played a big role in constellating the quality of life after that, and it affected the politics, including the rise of forms of like xenophobic populism and authoritarian impulses that get aroused. And that Saturn-Uranus-Pluto T-square of the 2008 to 2011 period, that was the only one of T-square of those three planets since 1929 to 33, which was the last time there was a sudden global financial collapse. And that in turn totally shaped the next, the rest of the 30s, which was the last time Uranus and Pluto were square. You have the Uranus-Pluto square from like 1928 to 37. And then We had the conjunction all through the 60s, which is that more 60s and early 70s energy, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the empowerment of the impulse for freedom and for radical change and the new and so forth. And now we've been getting the square of these. So I'm kind of interweaving both the Saturn-Pluto and the Uranus-Pluto. Now it's pretty rare that you get Saturn twice coming into hard aspect during one of these longer, 10, 15 year Saturn, Uranus-Pluto periods. But this is one of them. We got it at the beginning, 2008 to 11, near the beginning, and we're getting it right at the very end. And we were aware that if we didn't go through the big fundamental structural changes, social, economic, ecological, that were so clearly needed when the various collapses happened. This is also the time of the Japanese nuclear disaster and earthquake and tsunami and many other things that were requiring us to rethink our mode of life. And that happened if what you get with these cycles is that if you don't respond adequately to what's needed, then the next time, in this case, Saturn comes into the hard aspect, and in this case, the conjunction, the climax of the cycle, then the chickens come home to roost. This is when the screws tighten. It's when the reality principle, Saturn, gets driven into our lives with just ruthless intensity by the Plutonic impulse. Okay, I want to say a few words about the Saturn-Pluto very positive things that you can do with these energies and that are visible in the people who are born with these aspects and carry it through their lives in noble ways. Often, by the way, there's a feeling of carrying the weight of history on their shoulders and having a great work that they have to do. Thomas Berry's phrase. But I think of Greta Thunberg with carrying the weight of history, and that seriousness that she carries in her face. That's the Saturn. Saturn is serious. It's the spirit of gravity, and it's exactly. I mean, she's just like what's exactly been called for out of the depths of the collective psyche to have a figure like her speak truth to power. So a capacity for sustained effort and determination, that's something that Saturn-Pluto tends to constellate for people. Capacity for intense focus and discipline to direct your will and mobilize resources and personal energies on behalf of a purpose, of a chosen purpose for sustained periods of time, as in the hard labor of birth, for example. And if you think about, I mean, Saturn is labor, Saturn is contraction, and Pluto propels and drives with volcanic, all the elemental energies of nature. That's what a birth labor is about. The mother feels the potency of nature's energies moving through her that are simultaneously propelling in a Plutonic way, but contracting in a Saturn way. And these two together are like basically the aspect of birth, but they also it's a combination of like of a death contraction, a dying to the old identity, a dying to the old to the womb, and a separation from that past, and a tremendous propulsion through contraction into another mode of being, into a new identity, into a new organism, a birth. So these, I'll just say that the three planets I've been talking about, there's the Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. They are the archetypal complex that rules the death rebirth process. and they're very potent historically and psychologically. And it's no accident that the two psychologists, depth psychologists of the last century, who most grasped the Saturn Pluto, they most grasped the fundamental nature of the death rebirth process, the death rebirth mystery, psychologically, elementally, archetypally, were C.G. Jung and Stan Grof, and they were born. They were born in 1875 in Jung's case, 1931 in Stan Grof's case, and they both were born with that T-square of Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. By the way, there was another. That was the only other major global financial crash prior to the Great Depression of 1929 and the 30s, was in the 1873 to 76 period. They called it the Long Recession around the world, the financial collapse. And anyway, but Jung was born with that. And both Jung and Grof have a profound understanding of what is at stake with this tremendous threshold of transformation, that to become oneself in the individuation process, to go through a dying to the old identity and a spiritual, psychological rebirth. It's not just a kind of, well, if you just kind of accept that little rain has to fall sometimes, and then you're going to have nice things like flowers. It's not like that. It's far more grave and titanically demanding. Dying, when Jung writes about it in the Red Book, or when Stan Grof describes the ego death and the perinatal process, they're talking about the dark night of the soul. They're talking about facing the hardest conditions of life, the darkest, most demanding, and even facing not just danger, but facing the shadow, facing evil, and really taking it on and allowing it's an initiatory process. And many of us have for a while been conscious of the fact that we are, as a species, as a planet, as a civilization, we're going through a profound rite of passage, an initiatory transformation. We're in the crucible right now. More and more people are becoming aware of it. It's been going on for a while, but it's just kind of reaching extreme intensity and right now. And the drama could hardly be more taut, but it probably is going to get more taut. And there is a profound sense of uncertainty that always accompanies any transformation on that scale of an initiatory rite of passage. You have to have uncertainty about the outcome. You have to feel that everything is on the line, or else it won't have psychological power. It won't produce the profound moral reconfiguration of one's life that facing death does. There's nothing like an encounter with death to reconfigure one's moral values. And you really have to feel it's on the line for that life is on the line for that to happen. And in a way, our civilization today now has more of an opportunity to go through this transformation than it ever has before. And so those of us who, and I know so many of you who are listening tonight, have devoted your lives to going through this kind of transformation within your own individual life journeys, but also as part of a collective effort to to transform our world and to enter into a more life-enhancing relationship with the larger Earth community, and to come into contact with the great deeper meanings and purposes of our ensouled cosmos. And this is our time in many ways. Okay, a few more things here. There's a capacity for great thrift and conservation of resources, for greater organizational disciplines, heavy construction, rebuilding things from the ground up, the capacity for extraordinary physical or mental discipline, character building, forging structures and habits that will endure. This is a time for this is a time to do heavy lifting. What you put into place, what you work hard on, the hard labor right now in your life can set up structures that will last for the rest of your life. And so take the opportunity. Okay, and I think, let's see, on the problematic side, I want to just point out there is a tendency under these alignments to project shadow and evil onto others, and demonization, judgment, j'accuse moments, great trials, psychological splitting, othering, scapegoating. All those are things to be very, very conscious of. And that's why the greater the psychological awareness that we bring to it, the better. The bigger background of this Uranus-Pluto, I'll say just a couple more words about the Uranus-Pluto huge alignment that we've been going through for the last 15 years approximately. There's going to be a film documentary series coming out called Changing of the Gods that headed by Anir's Kenny Ausable and Louis Schwartzberg and Max de Arman and Theo Badashi from our own Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program have all been working on, and they're going to be doing this on the entire period that of the Uranus-Pluto. It's going to be focused on this Uranus-Pluto period and all the powerful movements towards world transformation, social, political, ecological, psychological, etc., that have been so evident over these last 12 to 15 years. Also the hyper technological advance, etc. That cycle is the one that connects us to the 60s, whole period from 60 to 72, and all the tremendous social and political and ecological movements that happened that originated then in many ways are coming to a new level of empowerment right now. But so also is the shadow side of the 60s. We have to remember, I mean, that's when Nixon became president. It's when great forces of reaction came in, and racism and in new ways, and patriarchal resistance to the feminist awakening and so forth. So, but it tends to happen on a mass level. And if we go back to, of course, it's easy to see all these energies at work in that classic case of the Uranus-Pluto alignment of the French Revolution, 1787 to 98. Everything was there. The entire eruption of the emancipatory impulse, and also the shadow of the violence and the will to power that could get mixed in with the revolutionary impulse. In a way, the Rolling Stones, who carry this energy so much with the their great music from the 1960s, you take songs like Street Fighting Man, or Give Me Shelter, or Sympathy for the Devil, Midnight Rambler. They are carrying in all these different ways. Everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet. The time is right for palace revolution. I shout and scream. I kill the king. I rail at all his servants. That's the my name is called disturbance. Today people would say my name is called disruption. That's That's the energy that we've been working with over these this last 12, 15 years or so. And that the Saturn Pluto conjunction is now just bringing in the reality principle and the great kind of threshold that we need to cross with considerable courage. Let me just say something. I mentioned Jupiter in there. Jupiter conjoining Pluto and, well, the entire configuration. I'll just say Jupiter tends to bring in more of a kind of expansive quality, more global. I mentioned the kind of, it tends to bring in a quality of high drama, of geopolitical power dynamics. It can bring at its best profound capacity for leadership, and which we're seeing, obviously not in certain highly placed venues, but at the level of civil society, at the level of governors in our own country, and of the medical profession, and like a greater, deeper confidence and inner kind of moral strength to bring a transformation and a regeneration and a rebirth to our time. That's you know, people like Lincoln, for example, was born with that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction and really carried it, or FDR. Many others I could mention, but they just jumped to mind. Whoops, I gotta come back here. And so, but it also can bring in an inflation. It can bring in, like, authoritarian regimes can make power grabs under this, under the crisis atmosphere, that and expand their authoritarian will to power. That's a shadow side of that. And then the Jupiter-Saturn, I alluded to it a little bit, but that combination, it tends to really bring in, I mean, just, I'm sure every person listening tonight is conscious of how many people are out there right now who are on the front lines, who are doing the things that are absolutely crucial to keep the human experiment afloat, and are radically underpaid or dismissed or kept at the, you know, not given adequate health care or health care insurance at all, who are not even welcomed into the country, but oh yeah, now we need you, that kind of thing. Social justice and injustice issues tend to get pressed to the surface with great intensity when you've got Pluto right on it. And so this is like the time to think through social justice and programs of social transformation on all levels. The feminist, the LGBTQ, race, ethnicity, class, poverty, and then the international community, which is so radically unbalanced as well in terms of wealth and injustice. I mentioned that Neptune's doing something. I'm almost at the end here, and then I'm going to open up to questions. Neptune's in a besides the ongoing sextile with Pluto and the triple conjunction that's been going. That sextile lasts about 100 years. That's a kind of ongoing thing. I won't talk about that right now. But Neptune is in a semi-square with Uranus right now, and that's a much shorter transit, and that has a lot to do with a kind of altering of consciousness that can be disorienting. You see it at times of, like, for example, I mean, the entire, in some ways, we've all gone through the looking glass in the last 2 months. It's just like this reality shift has brought about a consciousness shift that can be disorienting. Also, the amount of time that people are spending on the electronic image, the screen, the high-tech way of communicating. It's very Uranus-Neptune. All the Zoom meetings and teachings and so forth. Also, everybody that's watching Netflix movies every night, or streaming films and stuff. And there can be an escapist tendency to it as well. But there also can be I mean, we really see how much the infrastructure that has been created technologically over the last 20 years or so, and just so accelerated with social media and the internet in the last 15 years, has given us a kind of lifeline of communication in so many life-enhancing, benign ways that we can be grateful for as we continue to be conscious of all the ways in which it may not be quite so unproblematic. Let me finish before I open up questions with a quotation from a couple people whom I greatly admire for our time. One is Joanna Macy, and Joanna, whose birthday is just coming up here in the next few days, 91 years old, great teacher of our time. And she said this: out of this darkness, a new world can arise, not to be constructed by our minds so much as to emerge from our dreams. Even though we cannot see clearly how it's going to turn out, we are still called to let the future into our imagination. We will never be able to build what we have not first cherished in our hearts. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it's natural to feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger, or the fear, for these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. To suffer with is the literal meaning of compassion. Many people don't get involved in the Great Turning because there are so many different issues which seem to compete with each other. Shall I save the whales or help battered children? The truth is that all aspects of the current crisis reflect the same mistake, setting ourselves apart and using others for our gain. So to heal one aspect helps the others to heal as well. Just find what you love to work on and take joy in that. Never try to do it alone. Link up with others. You'll spark each other's ideas and sustain each other's energy. I think, you know, she's a woman of great wisdom, who I think we can keep in mind these words with great help, as a great aid to us right now. So I'll take some questions right now, and maybe right at the very end I'll share that other quotation that I was going to share. Let's see. Am I to? Oh, there we go. Question and answers. Okay, the most obvious question: how long are these challenging conjunctions going to be influencing global events? Are there more salubrious conditions coming anytime soon? Very good question. Okay, so these next 2 to 3, particularly like this year, next year, and even the third year, I didn't mention the Saturn square Uranus, but that brings in a real, just the clash between the old and the new, and the sudden collapse of old structures. But if we can kind of hold the tension of opposites, we can really make that one goes right into 2022 into 2023. So these next 3 years are we're in it. I mean, it's a stiff wind blowing. It will dynamically evolve during this time, depending a lot on what we do. But it is particularly this year and next year, I would say, are especially challenging. And as the 2020s progress, we're going to get a trine between Uranus and Pluto. So the whole second half of the decade, but even starting a little before the middle, Uranus will trine Pluto, where there'll be more of a confluence between the kind of Promethean energies towards the new, and the Plutonic evolutionary energies, and perhaps, if depending very much on what we work through right now, we can maybe, I mean, we'll be getting help, as it were. I mean, we're always getting help. Where danger is, that their salvation lies near, as Novalis said, the German poet. Now, that Uranus square Pluto, which went from 2007 to 2020, that's a long transit, and we're right. By the way, these transits, like for the squares, roughly a 10-degree orb. For the conjunctions and oppositions, it's more like a 15-degree orb. This is what our research has over and over again shown. If we do really, really careful empirical analyses of history, you have to see it in terms of these larger wave patterns that come in and it's not right when they come into alignment, that exact alignment for like conjunction or something like that for that month. It's not like that. These are big archetypal wave patterns that come in and surge through the collective psyche. And particularly with these long ones, where it's as we now move to the end of the Uranus-Pluto in a astronomical sense, we're now at about moving to the 10-degree past exact in the course of this year. But much as with the 1960s and the 60 to 72 transit, what we think of as the 60s energy, while there was a definite shift in the wind, you could feel as we moved into the 70s, and but there was another way in which those energies kept. There was a momentum, and so many streams, so many collective movements and impulses are at work at that time that continue going from there. Feminism got stronger in the 70s. Even after the Uranus-Pluto was over, it gets inflected by new archetypal dynamics, but it's like the door opens, the birth happens, and then it depends what we do with those energies as to what happens. Same thing with the ecology movement, got stronger and stronger all through the 70s, the gay liberation movement and so forth. So there, with this Uranus-Pluto period that's moving to the end, there's a big afterglow, so to speak, that we can that will be taking place, and a lot of that can propel. These are the kind of energies where very good psychotherapeutic and transformational work can be done because of the amount of energy, but it has to be done, consciously. And this is where everybody's got to step up and bring wise, speak the truth, and bring your wisdom into the communities that you're part of. Now's our time. What can we do individually to prepare for this new birth or new world? What can we do to help create a new transformation for the world? I mean, well, I kind of addressed that a bit with the with what I just said, and also with Joanna Macy's quote. I mean, it's like, find what you're good at. Find what gives you that kind of inner spirit is driving you to contribute to the world. It's like who you are will most actualize itself when you are most kind of grounded in the depths that are speaking through you, and you're connected to the cosmos and the Earth's energies coming through you. So attend to that. Pay attention to your dreams, to the synchronicities, to what's being requested of you in that given moment. Can I explain the interrelation of Pluto with plutocracy? Well, plutocracy, it has to do with rulership by the wealthy. It actually has to do with another god called Plutos that's different than Pluto, Hades. But they kind of got overlapped in Greek. They merged in many ways in Greek Greco-Roman myth. And the connection between wealth and power is definitely there. And plutocracy does tend to get strongly exacerbated under periods such as we're going through right now, Uranus-Pluto and Saturn-Pluto. And this is where we really have to be very conscious of this, this quite problematic side of the collective psyche and individual psyches. Is it an evolutionary decision that we're making whether we survive this or not, or do you think we will surely survive? Good question. See, we're all in an initiatory transformation that nobody is outside of, like elders in the village running the rite of passage. Nobody's outside it. We're all in it together. We don't know what's coming. But let me say this, certainly much will depend on how we respond. And I mean, some days and some pieces of news are so encouraging. And so you get some signs of such intelligence at work, and people making wise decisions, and like constructive governmental and social and environmental decisions. But clearly the forces of darkness have got a very strong hand right now, and we have our work cut out for us. And it's, you know, total self-destruction is unfortunately not out of the question. Let me say something that's been hovering in the background of all I've been saying. You know, we so much need communities, like the community that I'm sharing this with tonight, all of you who are listening. We need communities to hold us as we each go through our deep individual transformation, which is so emotionally as well as, you know, kind of intellectually and morally challenging. We need communities to hold that. But there's and that's why I say there's so many heroic communities around the world who are carrying this vision of the good that is counter to the mainstream society's vision in many ways of what it would be what their images of a great way to live. And what I want to point out is that everything I've been talking about to you tonight is describing a cosmos in which the great planetary movements of the macrocosm around the Earth, and as the Earth is moving around them and rotating and everything, excuse me, there's this amazing kind of orchestration of meaning and purpose that is focused on this Earth by all these planets that I'm talking about. And what I've been sharing with you tonight is just scratching the surface of the correlations of the evidence. I mean, it's so vast. I mean, Cosmos and Psyche carries it through history in a pretty detailed way, in a way that I think can help many kind of, you know, wake up to that book. It can help us discern just the vastness of the I mean, Stan Groff and I've talked about it sometimes. It's just like the mind reels as you take in the power and the level of intelligence and creative intelligence that is in interaction with our live creative responses to the archetypal energies at any given time. It shatters our normal rational capacities to take in what kind of a cosmos we live in, that this would be possible. And studying it, immersing ourselves in it, taking in its meaning is in a way a kind of spiritual opening to the fact that the cosmos, the universe is just like pouring its energies of meanings and purposes in a way that is like bathing our Earth. This moving planet, this speck of dust in the vast cosmos, is somehow also a focus of cosmic meaning. And every individual with their own birth charts that gets played out in the course of life and actualized is also a focus of cosmic meaning. And every moment in our lives as the transits go by and we track how remarkably these archetypal powers are at work in our lives, and the very experience of seeing this is healing. It reconnects us to the cosmic whole. It makes us recognize that what's most important to us, our interior psyche and our interior psyche is like where our perceptions, our emotions, our heart, our aspirations for beauty and goodness and a better world, all that's inside us. And yet it is somehow what is inside us is also being carried in the interior of the cosmos and of the earth, that it's a continuous, we're embedded in this larger ensouled cosmos and the anima mundi, the world soul, and we're participating in it with our freedom, with our agency, with everything that we can bring to this moment is being carried in a kind of dance between human freedom and agency and our moral and spiritual capacities in relationship to this great cosmic mystery that we are embedded in. And that sense of being bathed by the cosmos in our lives and on our earth gives me, it's an act of concern by the cosmos. It's a kind of act of love, of care. And in that sense, I have a sense that we probably will survive in some form. And the stakes are very high. I don't know in what form that will take place, but it gives me a kind of faith in a larger mystery that we're participating in, and we're being asked to meet this moment. I was going to share with you Václav Havel. I think we're right at the end of our time. I know there's so many worthwhile questions, and who knows, maybe I don't know if there's any way that I can see these Q&A, these questions later, and I can type up answers for those who, I'm not sure if that's even possible, but I'll leave it up to the technical people, and then people might be able to put it up on the website later. This is from Václav Havel, the great dissident against the communist government in Czechoslovakia, and then he became president in 1990, and then he was part of Stan Gross' generation there in Prague, and he came here to Stanford and gave a talk about 26 years ago, 1994, and Stan and I were there, and he actually addressed Stan's work and the kind of universal meaning of Gross' psychological findings and practice. But he said these words that have always stuck with me ever since. He said, "Planetary democracy does not yet exist, but our global civilization is already preparing a place for it. It is the very earth we inhabit, linked with heaven above us. Only in this setting can the mutuality and the commonality of the human race be newly created, with reverence and gratitude for that which transcends each of us and all of us together. The authority of a world democratic order simply cannot be built on anything else but the revitalized authority of the universe. The authority of a world democratic order simply cannot be built on anything else but the revitalized authority of the universe." Havel was very, he was a prophet, and he saw this clearly, and I think these are important. It's important to keep in mind. Those of you who want more resources for getting more information along this line, I know I've kind of compressed a lot into the last hour and a half, but you could go to the cosmosanpsyche.com website, cosmosanpsyche, one word, .com. That's got like an introductory essay that you might find very useful, and other essays and videos and so forth, other resources that you might find helpful. And you can go to there's the Archetypal View website that Chad Harris runs that has lots of good videos on archetypal cosmology, astrology. You can also track your own transits through another website that another PCC member of our community, alum Kyle Weimetter, set up with great labor called Archetypal Explorer that you can check out. These are all really worthwhile tools that you can use, and get a good reading from. I particularly recommend astrologers who have a good grounding in depth psychology, have taken in Jung, taken in Groth. Someone at the Archetypal Prism website is very good there. But anyway, get a good astrological reading, and in addition, just keep in mind those noble words from Friedrich Nietzsche. He said towards the end of his life, all pain is hallowed by birth pain. In a sense, all pain is birth pain, and what we're going through is the birth labors of a new world, a new humanity, and a new Earth community. And this is the time. I mean, the transits are so potent, they are so lined up, and it's our time to rise to the occasion and bring everything that we've been learning over these decades. Okay, thank you very much for being with me this evening, and go forth and take the world to a new place.
Thank you so much, Rick. That was really beautiful. And thank you everybody who was able to attend tonight. We'll work on trying to send out some of that stuff that you were talking about, Rick, so that we can maybe send that to everyone who registered this evening. We do hope that you'll join us for more of our upcoming events. We're announcing new ones every day. Our next one will be Spiritual Ecology and Regenerative Economics with Della Duncan on May 6th. And that link is in the chat if you want to learn more about that. We did record this event this evening, so if you want to watch it again or share it with someone who couldn't be here, you can visit the CIIS Public Programs YouTube channel or our Facebook page. The video will be up there. This talk's also going to be on our podcast, which you can find at CIISpod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. So that'll be on the podcast in a couple of weeks. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Rick. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.